They always say timing is everything. I did not expect mine to come down to a single vibration in my pocket during the second set of a Grand Slam match. The stadium was alive, elegant, loud in waves, and unmistakably Parisian in its character. It was the French Open. And I was not just there for tennis. I was sitting next to someone most people in my world would pay to get 10 minutes with. A man whose name moved markets. One of the most respected figures in our field. And somehow, I had ended up in the seat next to him. My name is Sean Avery. I am, or I was, the senior strategy consultant for a mid-sized, rapidly scaling firm in the tech infrastructure space. Not one of the loud names in the industry, but we had made quiet waves in the last 3 years. The kind of firm that became known for its turnaround playbook. The one boards called when things got shaky and reputations were at risk. I had spent nearly 7 years there, starting with contract work, then full-time strategy roles, eventually becoming the person who was pulled into every major negotiation, every M&A whisper, every boardroom-level correction. I did not chase titles. I chased leverage, quiet leverage, influence, results, trust. That trust had limits. The text came in just after a long rally ended, and the crowd settled into its polite applause. I glanced down expecting a schedule change, or a travel update. Instead, I saw 5 words. We are going a different direction. It was from my CEO. No subject line, no explanation. Just a follow-up 2 minutes later that read, Your engagement is concluded. Effective immediately. HR will follow up. I sat still. I did not flinch, did not stand up, did not show it on my face. I simply tilted the phone slightly away from the man seated next to me and took a breath. He leaned toward me slightly, eyes still on the court, and said, Everything all right? I nodded once. It will be. That moment, that pause, that is where this story really begins. Because what my CEO did not know, what he could not have known, was exactly who I was sitting next to, and what we had been discussing before that message arrived. 3 days earlier, I had been in our main office in Zurich, walking the CFO through a model I had designed to restructure our 3 lowest-performing verticals. It was not just cost-cutting, it was a realignment based on a 12-month trend I had been tracking independently. I had not pitched it until the data told a consistent story. When I finished, the CFO asked one question. Have you shown this to him yet? I had not. I said I wanted to be certain it would stand up to pressure before I took it upstairs. That model was never presented. 3 hours later, I received a message asking me to cancel upcoming travel and stay flexible this week. That was the first red flag. The second was more subtle. I was removed from 2 strategy meetings, without notice, replaced by someone whose entire track record fit on one slide. But I said nothing. I had seen reorgs before. I had survived them. I had even designed a few. What I had never experienced was a firing without a call. Not even a single word from the person I had helped pull out of a public-facing crisis 9 months earlier. No gratitude. No reasoning. Just silence, then execution. I did not walk out of that stadium. I finished watching the match. And beside me, the man who had noticed the text? His name was Philip Renner, founder of a global enterprise consulting firm, a competitor to my now former employer, yes, but also someone I had worked against during a contract bid 2 years earlier. We had never spoken directly. But he remembered me. That conversation after the match is one I will never forget, because it was the beginning of something else entirely. But before we get there, let me take you back 6 months to how this really unfolded. Because this was not about performance, it was not about misalignment. It was not even about cost. It was about insecurity, and one man who wanted the influence I had built, without the friction of having to share it. 6 months before Paris, our company had landed its largest contract to date, a regional infrastructure overhaul that would span 3 countries and 5 regulatory frameworks. I had been instrumental in designing the compliance architecture for the bid. I had flown out twice to meet with regional advisors before the ink was dry. When we won, my CEO called me personally to thank me. That was the last call he ever made, to me directly. After the project kicked off, I began noticing a pattern. Initiatives I had developed were being rolled out without my name attached. Internal emails circulated language I had drafted, but with edits made to suggest someone else had led the effort. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I saw a deck prepared by the CEO himself for a presentation to the board. 3 slides were taken directly from a framework I had written during a weekend push. No attribution, not even internal acknowledgement, just lifted wholesale. I stayed quiet, not because I was afraid, but because I believed then that the work spoke for itself. That outcomes mattered more than internal applause. That belief was my mistake. The culture had shifted in the past year. Our CEO, once collaborative, transparent, deliberate, had begun consolidating power. Meetings got smaller, decisions less documented. Feedback loops were shut down, not expanded. When I finally asked to speak privately about the direction we were heading, the conversation lasted 7 minutes. He told me I was thinking like a consultant, not a builder. That was all I needed to hear. I began documenting everything from that point forward. Emails, slides, call summaries, timelines. Not because I planned to take legal action, but because I knew this was heading somewhere I would not be invited to participate in. The French Open invitation came unexpectedly. From Philip, actually, through a mutual connection who said, "He wants to pick your brain on something. Just go. You will enjoy the break." And so, I went. We talked casually at first. Industry trends, structural risks, a few shared opinions on how certain players were burning capital trying to win attention. Nothing sensitive. Just intelligent conversation between 2 people who had both been around long enough to recognize patterns. When I got the text, I said nothing. Not for drama, but because I knew I needed to finish that match with my composure intact. What I felt in that moment was not anger. It was clarity. They had not just fired me. They had created an opportunity. Because sitting next to me was someone who had been quietly looking for a way to rebuild a failing division. His firm had acquired 18 months prior, and I had just become available. By text, I did not respond to the message until the next morning. My reply was 1 sentence. "Understood. Please send formal documentation to my attorney." I received a reply 2 hours later from HR, attaching a single-page termination letter dated 3 days prior. 3 days. They had planned this before. I even left Zurich. That morning, I received another message, this time from Philip. It read, "I suspect your weekend just opened up. Coffee?" I met him that afternoon, and everything began to shift. Paris looked different the next day. Maybe it was the clarity. Maybe it was the absence of performance pressure. For the first time in months, I did not have to defend a budget, explain a model, or forecast anything for a room of people who had already made up their minds. I met Philip at a small cafe tucked behind the main promenade, far from the noise of the tournament and the pace of our usual business settings. He was already seated when I arrived, unbothered as always, sipping an espresso like someone with nowhere else to be, though I knew that was never true. He stood to shake my hand, and without any small talk said, "Tell me what they got rid of." I smiled at the phrasing. "What makes you think they got rid of anything valuable?" He gestured for me to sit. "Because they always do. It is a cycle. Smart people make things too visible. Average leaders cannot handle it. They strip out the voice that holds the room together and convince themselves they are just clearing noise." That was the first time I heard someone say aloud what I had been thinking for months. I did not go into detail at first. I gave him the surface: high-performing projects, gradual exclusion, silent credit theft, and a clean firing with no confrontation. He listened. No interruptions, no reassurances, just a pause when I was done. Then he said, "I have a problem, and I think you already know what it is." I did. Philip's firm had made a high-profile acquisition 2 years ago, a boutique advisory group with strong numbers but weak operations. The founders had exited quickly, taking their culture and core relationships with them. What remained was an expensive shell. Good branding, bad execution. He had been trying to fix it internally, quietly, carefully. But results were not improving. They had lost 3 of their legacy clients in the past 9 months, and one of their senior partners had just taken a job at a direct competitor. Morale was fractured. And worse, no one could explain where their processes were breaking down. "I need to rebuild this from the inside," he said. "But I cannot take a scalpel to it without someone who knows where to look." I knew what he was asking, and I knew the risk. Helping restructure a division inside a competitor's firm just days after being terminated would not go unnoticed. But here is the part I had already decided the moment I got that text in the stadium. I was done tiptoeing around fragile egos. If I was going to work again, it would be for someone who actually wanted results, not just recognition. So I asked him, "What is your timeline?" He smiled. "I would prefer yesterday." We spent the next 3 hours outlining everything he was willing to share about the failing division. The original business model, the integration missteps, the cultural split between old and new teams, the blind spots he suspected but could not prove. I asked for access. Not permanent access, just enough to audit. Contracts, workflows, internal memos, anonymized client feedback. He agreed without hesitation. That mattered more than anything he could have said. No power plays, no games, just full transparency. "Send me what you can by end of week," I told him. He leaned back. "And what do I call you when I loop you in?" That stopped me for a second. I had not thought about titles. You do not. Just tell them you are bringing in a second pair of eyes. Quietly. I am not here to claim anything. That is how it started. Not a role, not a title. Just a conversation between 2 people who knew exactly what was broken, and were both tired of pretending it was not. By Monday, I was back in Zurich. Technically unemployed, but busier than I had been in weeks. I spent the next 10 days reading. No slides, no meetings, no approvals, just documents. Hundreds of them. Process flows, onboarding instructions, old client satisfaction reports. I built a framework in silence, mapping patterns the internal team had missed because they were too close to the noise. It became clear within 3 days. The division had no operating spine. Decisions were reactive. Data was siloed. They were optimizing surface-level indicators and ignoring structural failure points. The founders who sold the business had been running it off intuition and charm. Once they left, there was no muscle, memory left behind. I built out 3 core scenarios, one to stabilize, one to integrate, and one to relaunch. Each had risks. None were easy, but they were real. I sent it to Philip on a Thursday night. The next morning he called me directly. "No assistant, no preamble. This is what I needed," he said. "Are you in?" I paused. "You mean permanently?" He exhaled. "I mean visibly." It was a bigger ask than it sounded. Becoming visible meant owning the solution. It meant being a name people could point to if it failed, or if it succeeded. It also meant making peace with the fact that word would get back to my old firm. Quickly, I told him I needed the weekend. I spent those 2 days not thinking about the politics, but the work. The kind of work I had not been allowed to do in months. Clean, hard, high-trust execution. I missed it. Not the meetings, not the messaging, the building. By Sunday, I had made up my mind. I called Philip back and told him the only condition. I would not work in isolation. I would need access to the actual teams, mid-level managers, client liaisons, data analysts, the ones who knew what was happening on the ground. No problem, he said. They will be waiting. He introduced me to the internal team that week. Quietly. No announcement. Just an email. Sean Avery will be reviewing current workflows across multiple verticals. Please assist him as requested. And just like that, I was inside. Not with revenge in mind. Not with some long play to get even. Just focused on the work. Clean, deliberate, professional. But that is not how the world works, is it? Because within 10 days, word got out, not from me, not from Philip, but from someone on his board who happened to also be on a nonprofit committee with one of the partners at my old firm. And what followed? A panic email from the same CEO who had fired me by text. It came in late on a Friday. 2 sentences. Hope you are well. Hearing you may be active in some interesting spaces. Would welcome a quick catch-up if you have time next week. No subject. Line. Just like before. I did not respond. He followed up with a LinkedIn message. Then a forwarded calendar invite from his assistant. I declined it. Because here is the thing. Once someone shows you how they really view your value, you do not forget it. You do not have to get loud. You just get to work. And in a few weeks, I would be presenting a relaunch strategy to a full executive board, one that included 2 investors I knew had recently cooled on my old firm. Not because of me, but because they had started asking questions. And those questions were ones my former CEO did not want to answer. I walked into the room and immediately knew who did not want me there. It was subtle. It always is. A glance that lingers a bit too long. A half-second delay before someone moves over to make space. A greeting that sounds polite but lands just sharp enough to register. This was my first full team session with Philip's internal group. 12 people from across 4 verticals, all senior, all high performers on paper. But only half of them believed in the idea of outside help. The rest saw me as a mirror, and no one likes being reminded of what is not working. Still, I introduced myself simply. My name is Sean. I am not here to fix anyone. I am here to help surface the things that are slowing you down. That line always buys you a few minutes of patience. I laid out the framework I had built over the last 2 weeks. I walked them through the logic, the blind spots, and the inconsistencies in their current process layers. I did not blame. I did not speculate. I just showed them what their own data was already saying. And then I stopped talking. The silence lasted longer than I expected. Then someone at the end of the table said, "So what exactly is the ask here?" There it was. The quiet challenge. I looked at him. Older, probably in his 50s, with the weary tone of someone who had seen consultants come and go. "There is no ask yet," I replied. "Right now I need your buy-in to validate what is real, not what we hope is working, not what looks good on a dashboard. What is actually getting done?" He looked at me like he had not decided whether to trust me or dismiss me. Fair enough. We agreed on a 3-week audit sprint. I would sit with teams, shadow a few processes, review back-end workflows, and do one-on-one interviews. No hierarchy, no filters, just truth. The first week was rough. A few managers gave me perfect answers to questions they did not understand. One team walked me through a project timeline that was clearly built backward from a deadline no one believed in. And a client success rep, probably the most honest person I met that week, confided that they had stopped reporting certain issues because no one ever followed up anyway. It was not sabotage. It was fatigue. They were smart, capable, and stretched. Too thin trying to hold together systems no longer built to support the business they had become. Midway through week 2, I got a message from Philip. "I just got off a call with someone at the old place. Thought you would find this interesting. Attached was a screenshot of an internal slide, part of a quarterly update at my former firm. On it was a list of competitors, strategically monitored for market activity. Philip's company was on the list, and next to it, in smaller font, it read, "Recent senior consultant activity flagged. Possible advisory overlap with former personnel." They knew, or at least suspected. Which explained the message I got later that afternoon. This one was different. Not from my former CEO. From someone I had worked with for 6 years. Not a friend, not a rival. Just someone who had always played it safe, stayed neutral, stayed employed. "Saw your name come up. They are not thrilled. You might want to be careful with how public this gets. No malice, just a warning." But the funny part was, I had not gone public with anything. I was working inside a private team on a quiet restructure. No PR, no LinkedIn update, nothing. They were the ones chasing shadows. And that is when I realized the thing that really unnerved them was not what I was doing. It was that they no longer knew what I knew. For over a decade, I had been the one, quietly advising behind the scenes, clarifying chaotic meetings, fixing broken vendor deals, flagging risk before it exploded. I was the margin of error no one noticed, until I was gone. And now, someone else had that margin. That week, Philip asked me to present the findings so far to his core executive team. Not the full board, just the people who had real skin in the game. We kept it to 6 people, all decision makers, all close to the numbers. I opened with a single question. What would you do differently if you knew every delay you blamed on external factors actually started inside your own operations? That got their attention. I walked them through 3 key patterns I had uncovered. Client onboarding times had doubled, not because of volume but because of misaligned approval gates. The steps had been duplicated across 2 systems after the acquisition, and no one had removed the legacy pathway. Retention rates were slipping, not due to product quality, but because support tickets were bouncing between 3 teams with no single point of escalation. By the time issues were resolved, trust was already gone. Revenue leakage in contracts, over 1.4 million euros in missed renewals, because no one owned the data handoff between sales and finance after the restructuring. None of this was dramatic, it was just quiet loss. The kind that slowly erodes credibility while everyone keeps insisting it is just a rough quarter. When I finished, no one spoke for a moment. Then one of the executives leaned forward and said, "Why did no one catch this sooner?" I did not answer. Because I knew the real answer. It had been visible the whole time. But visibility is not the same thing as ownership. The rest of the meeting was spent outlining what I needed next. Access to implementation heads, permission to prototype a leaner workflow, and direct reporting to Philip's chief of staff. Not as a formality, as an enforcement layer. They agreed, all of them. And just like that, I moved from shadow consultant to official architect. The next morning, I got another message. This time, from someone I had not heard from since the termination. A partner at my old firm. "You have got their attention." Now, he did not say more. He did not need to. Because what came next was not quiet. It was calculated. Over the following week, 3 clients I had once managed personally got emails from my former CEO. Each one included a thinly veiled update on my status. "Just wanted to share that Sean is no longer with us. We wish him well, but want to ensure continuity on your account during this transition." 2 of them forwarded me the email directly, confused. "Is this some sort of legal warning?" one asked. It was not. It was insecurity, dressed up as protocol. I told them I was fine. I told them I was working independently now, and unless they had signed something specific that restricted their vendor relationships, they were free to engage who they wanted. None of them had. And quietly, they began sending me scope outlines. Not just for Philip's company, for themselves. And that was the moment I knew the shift had started. Not just a career shift, a credibility shift. I was no longer the guy who helped fix problems behind a glass wall. I was the one they called when they did not trust the wall anymore. I did not have a grand plan when I left, let us be clear about that. I was not secretly plotting a comeback. There was no revenge arc pinned to a whiteboard. The French Open had just been the moment of clarity, the moment I understood I would rather be blindsided in Paris than bored in a boardroom where my ideas went to die. But something started happening once I stopped trying to prove anything. People started calling. It was subtle at first. A former client I had worked with on a messy integration a few years ago reached out. He had heard through someone, probably a vendor, that I was no longer with the firm. He did not even ask what happened. He just said, "We are finally sunsetting that legacy tool you warned us about. We want you in the room when we build the next thing." Another came from a CFO who had once questioned every line item I proposed. We had nearly butted heads on a restructuring model that, ironically, saved her department from being gutted during a funding slowdown. She reached out with a single line. "Are you advising solo now?" That was it. No fluff, no small talk, just business. I told her the truth. Yes, I was independent. No, I had not launched anything formal. And no, I was not trying to recreate what I left. She said, "Good. That firm never knew how to use you anyway." That stuck with me because I used to think the same thing, quietly, of course, but hearing it said out loud in plain language by someone who had once challenged me, it felt like something shifted. I started taking the meetings. At first I was cautious. I never wanted to create the impression that I was circling my old firm like a shark. I was not. In fact, I avoided every opportunity that felt like it came, with an agenda to get back at them. But what I learned quickly was this. Most people do not want revenge. They want results. And results do not come from titles, or quarterly pep talks, or culture decks. They come from people who are willing to sit in the ambiguity, ask the hard questions, and not flinch when the answers are inconvenient. That is what I did. And it started getting noticed. By month 3, I had 6 clients. All referral-based. All word of mouth. I never announced anything publicly. Never posted a dramatic resignation letter. I just showed up where I was needed and kept the focus on the work. But apparently, that was enough. Because one afternoon, I got a message I had never expected. It was short. "Are you free for a quick call today?" No agenda, just a conversation. It was from my former CEO, not his assistant, not his chief of staff. Him. I stared at the message for a moment. Then I typed, "I have 30 minutes free at 4 p.m. Let me know if that works." He replied within minutes. At 4 p.m., I dialed in. No video, just voice. He started with something polite, something meaningless. I do not remember the exact words. Something like, "Hope all's well," or "Sounds like you've been busy." Then came the pivot. "I have been thinking about how everything ended," he said. And I just want to say, I could have handled that better. I let the silence stretch. It was not a trap. It was not bait. It was just him, dancing around the part he still could not say directly. I told him, "I appreciate that," and I did. But appreciation does not rewrite a text message in the middle of a match. It does not change the way you are told your time is up before you have a chance to speak. Then he asked something I had not expected. "Would you ever consider coming back in a different capacity?" It hit harder than it should have. Not because I wanted to say yes, but because there had been a time, years ago, when I would have said yes without hesitation. I used to believe that loyalty meant staying. Now I believe it means telling the truth, even when it costs you comfort, so I said it. "No, I would not." There was a pause. He asked, Why? I told him. Because I have finally built something where the work speaks louder than the politics. He nodded quietly. I could tell. The call ended 10 minutes later with vague mutual well wishes and a promise to keep in touch, which we both knew meant nothing. But it was done. That chapter, whatever it had been, was over. The irony is, I did not tell anyone about that call, not even Philip, not the clients who knew the full backstory, not the executive who had sent me the "you have got their attention" message. It was not worth circulating, because this story, whatever it was becoming, was not about that old company anymore. It was about the work, and the work was getting heavier. Philip's company had accelerated its internal overhaul. The workflow designs I had drafted were now being implemented across multiple teams. I had weekly meetings with department heads. We were starting to see real numbers shift. Faster processing, fewer dropped clients, better vendor accountability. But we also stirred things up. People do not like change, even when they say they do. The implementation phase exposed more than inefficiencies. It surfaced old grievances. One manager had been hoarding responsibilities to keep their perceived value intact. Another had been quietly adjusting KPIs after deadlines were missed. It was messy, not malicious, just human. But here is where the difference came in. This time, leadership actually acted. Philip did not flinch when the data contradicted the internal narrative. He leaned in, made changes, reassigned responsibilities, backed the new processes. That kind of clarity has a cost. One afternoon, after a particularly tense rollout meeting, one of the senior analysts approached me privately. She said, "This is the first time in 3 years I have seen real accountability here. Whatever you are doing, keep doing it." It meant something, especially because I could see how tired she was. Change fatigue is real, but so is change inertia. Sometimes, the most dangerous state in a company is not crisis. It is comfort. And this company was finally moving out of its comfort phase, so I kept working. Then one day, I got a package. No note, just a clean black folder with my name embossed on the front. Inside, a signed retainer agreement. From a company I had never pitched, never spoken to. They were a mid-sized financial tech group, out of Amsterdam. I had once helped them during an acquisition, years ago, under the umbrella of my former firm. Apparently, they had tracked my work since I left. They had been waiting to see if I was serious. If this new chapter was a phase or a direction. Their note was simple, printed on the inside flap. "We know who you are. We do not care where you came from. We care what you fix." That line stayed with me. It still does, because it reminded me of something I had nearly forgotten. It is not about being seen. It is about being trusted. And trust, once earned, does not care what title you used to have. The folder sat on my desk for 3 days before I signed it. Not because I was unsure, but because I needed the space to recognize what this was becoming. I had gone from a quiet exit in Paris to a full advisory workload in less than 6 months. No PR, no interviews, no public story to control or correct. The work had simply spoken for itself. But this new client, the Amsterdam Group, changed the equation. They were not looking for someone to validate their thinking. They wanted someone who would challenge it. Someone who would walk into a clean, well-funded room and say, "You are about to waste money here, here, and here, unless you're honest about what your team is actually doing." That is what I did in our first meeting. They did not flinch. That was when I knew I was going to sign. The day I sent the countersigned retainer, I received another message. This one was different. It was from someone still at my old firm, not leadership, not legal, not anyone from senior management. It was someone I used to work alongside, mid-level, smart, often overlooked. We had shared more late-night delivery, meals, and off-the-record conversations than I could count. Her message was careful, I know this is probably a weird thing to say, but it is getting bad here. You were the buffer. No one said it out loud, but that's what you were. I did not respond right away, because part of me still had that reflex. Do not get dragged into the aftermath. Keep it clean. Keep it forward. But I could not ignore it either. So I replied, "What do you mean? Bad?" She typed for a long time before she sent anything. "Leadership is panicking. 2 of your former clients walked. Another just told our team they're delaying Q3 entirely. Internal memos are flying around, trying to frame it as market-related. It is not. They're just starting to realize the glue left." I stared at that message for a long time. I never wanted to be the glue. I wanted to be effective. But maybe sometimes those 2 things overlap. Then she added something else. Would you ever consider building something? Something real, not just freelance, something with people you trust. That sat with me because I had not considered it. Not really, I had no appetite to become a CEO. I had watched what that role did to people, how it hollowed them out and filled the empty space with performance metrics and boardroom politics. But building something, that felt different. Not for status, not for some inflated valuation or exit plan, but because the work needed it. Still, I told her the truth. I don't know yet, but if I do, you'll be the first to know. She simply replied, "Good, because I am done pretending this place is salvageable." Meanwhile, on Philip's side of things, we had reached the point, in the rebuild that no one likes to talk about. The plateau. We had done the cleanup. We had installed structure. We had gotten buy-in from most departments. But now we were in the part where everything felt slower. Processes were working, but they were not sexy. There were no ribbon cuttings, no dramatic wins, just consistency, which in real transformation is the hardest phase. People want the adrenaline, not the discipline. But discipline is where you build the culture that outlives you. Philip knew that. We sat down one evening after a long strategy session with his operations team, and he said something that stuck with me. "I never told you this," he said. "But when I saw you in Paris that day, I knew immediately they were going to regret it. Not because of what they did, but because of how calm you looked when you read the message." I remembered that moment. It felt surreal then. "Still does," he added. "I've seen people get blindsided and flail. You just sat with it, like you were already done with the place before the text even landed." I told him the truth. I was not angry when I read it. That is what surprised me. I thought I would be. But I wasn't. I was just done. He nodded. "You know what that means, right?" I waited. "It means you are ready to build something better. When you're no longer bitter, you're free." He was right. And that night, I started thinking seriously, for the first time, about what building something would look like. Not another firm. Not a vanity project, a platform. A model built for trust, not control. The next few weeks blurred. I was flying between cities, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, Toronto. I was balancing time zones, client calendars, and strategic deliverables. But I noticed something beneath it all. People were circling, not opportunists, not recruiters. People I respected. People who had survived bad leadership, watched it burn down good work, and were now quietly looking for something more stable. One of them, a compliance director I had collaborated with years ago, called me late one night. He said, "I heard a rumor you're building." I laughed. "I'm working. That's all I'm doing." He replied, "That's what they all say, right before they admit they're building." Then he got serious. "I do not need equity. I do not need a fancy title. I just need to know the decisions won't be made by people who panic every time a number shifts on a dashboard." It was not a job inquiry. It was a request for permission. For clarity, I told him. If I ever build something real, You will hear from me directly." He said, "That's all I needed to know." By now I had fully disconnected from my old company. No access, no ties, no interest in what came next for them. But one day, out of nowhere, someone sent me a screenshot. An internal memo had leaked. It was bland on the surface, some language about retention recalibration and refocusing external consulting initiatives. But the footnote was telling. They were shifting multiple accounts to outside vendors. The kind of accounts I used to manage, quietly outsourcing what they used to keep in-house. They were unraveling, not imploding, just thinning out. Sometimes failure is not dramatic. It is just a slow, quiet refusal to change until the silence becomes permanent. I did not feel vindicated. I felt removed, like watching a movie you had once auditioned for, only to realize the role was never yours. It just borrowed your voice, for a while. Then, one night, past midnight, back in my home office, I opened my notes and wrote one line. What would it look like to build a firm where integrity is the product? No slogans, no PR statements, just integrity. I stared at that question until the screen blurred. Then I started drafting. Not a mission statement, not a business plan, a manifesto. Something real. Not to sell, not to pitch, but to guide, because if I was going to build something now, it would not be about the money. It would be about the work, the kind of work that stands when the markets fall, when clients panic, when competitors circle. The kind of work I used to think I had to protect from the people I worked for. Now maybe I could just let it live. There is a point in every turning season when you stop noticing the weather, when the cold no longer bites and the heat no longer stifles. It just becomes part of the background. That was how the rebuilding phase felt. Somewhere between drafting, those first few pages of a vision, and replying to another unsolicited, "Are you hiring?" message, I stopped noticing how heavy the transition had been. I was not moving on anymore. I had already moved. People think launching something new is a leap. Sometimes it is, but other times it is a quiet walk forward, long after the bridge behind you has already collapsed. I started with 5 principles, not branding, not structure, just rules. No one gets in who cannot be trusted when money enters the room. No overpromising, not even a little. No culture decks. We show who we are by how we work, not how we pitch it. Flat structure, not chaos. Clear responsibility without hierarchy addiction. No waiting for permission. The 5th one was the hardest, especially for someone like me who had spent years staying inside the system, playing by it, learning how to operate within its unwritten codes. But the system had already let me go. The only thing keeping me in it was a habit of loyalty to places that had long stopped deserving it, so I stopped asking for permission. I booked a workspace. I hired 2 contract researchers I had worked with in a previous life. Sharp, humble, allergic to corporate fluff. I brought in an operations coordinator on a 90-day project basis. No promises, just structure. And slowly, something started to take shape. It was not a company, not yet, but it was a machine. A lean one, a focused one. Not designed to scale overnight. Not meant to win headlines, just built to work. And the first test came quicker than I expected. Philip called. His tone was different this time. "I have a situation," he said. "Okay." One of our oldest clients, German Automotive, needs a full market entry model for Southeast Asia. It is big, bigger than anything we have handled internally. "I want to give it to you." I paused. "That is not a small ask," I said. "I know, but you're the only one I trust to build it without dragging us into the mud. You have your own setup now. That means I do not have to fight legal to justify you anymore." I asked the only question that mattered. "Do they know about my history?" He did not miss a beat. "They do, and they are more interested because of it. I accepted. It was not ego. It was fit. These were the types of projects I had been quietly preparing for, long before I even knew I would need to. I looped in my small team. We set a 72-hour strategy sprint, then a 30-day delivery timeline. Everything clean, everything documented. No fluff. By week 3, the German team requested a permanent advisory engagement. I declined. It was not because I did not value their business. I did. But I was building something now, and I had to protect the integrity of it. I would not turn it into a consulting carousel where the model gets sold before it is tested. They respected that. When you set your terms early, the right people do not argue. They align. 3 days later, I received a message from someone I never expected to hear from again. Not my former boss. Worse, his right hand. The same person who had sat in meetings with me for years and nodded along while policies were gutted, clients were squeezed, and staff morale deteriorated one deadline at a time. He had always been careful, always loyal to whoever signed his paycheck. But now he sounded different. His message was short. "You free to talk? Off the record." I stared at the screen for longer than I needed to. Then I typed back, 15 minutes. No longer. When he joined the call, I noticed it immediately. He was not calling to rehash the past. He was calling because the ground beneath him was cracking. "We lost 3 more legacy clients," he said. "And leadership is spinning. They want to raise new funding without restructuring. Everyone internally knows it is a mistake, but no one will say it out loud." I said nothing. He added, "I do not expect sympathy, just context." Then he said something that shifted everything. "You built something. People are noticing." That was the first time anyone had said it like that. Not, "You are trying something." Not, "Your project." Not, "That thing you are doing." You built something. It caught me off guard more than I expected. He continued, "I am not asking for a role. I know I am not your first call, maybe not your 50th. But if you ever need context on how bad it got here, call me. I won't lie." I did not know what to say. This was a man I used to watch, carefully, trying to determine whether he was a strategist or a survivor. Now I realized he had always been both. "I will keep that in mind," I said, and I meant it. By this point, we were picking up momentum. Not because of marketing, but because people were talking. You cannot buy credibility. You earn it. Quietly, painfully, one clean decision at a time. And the clean decisions were starting to echo. A managing director in Dublin sent a referral. A former COO in Singapore reached out. One of my past junior analysts emailed with a list of 3 potential collaborators from within her own network. The project pipeline was not exploding, but it was growing, steadily. No splash, just depth. One afternoon I sat alone in the workspace and looked around. It was quiet. No walls covered in vinyl quotes, no massive branding wall, just whiteboards filled with real problems, annotated in shorthand only our tiny team understood. I smiled. It felt like mine. And for the first time in years, I did not feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. That night, I received another message from the same mid-level colleague who had first warned me about the unraveling. "I just handed in my notice. 3 others did too. None of us had other jobs lined up. Just done." I replied, "What changed?" She said, "We were already leaving in our heads. We just needed to believe someone could build something better." I read that 3 times. Then I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark for a long moment, because that was when I realized this was no longer about me. It was bigger now. It had to be. I never expected to become the person others looked to when they were trying to get out. Not escape, exactly, just leave something broken behind without losing the parts of themselves they still respected. But it kept happening. A message every week, sometimes 2, thinking of making a move, Not sure how much longer I can do this. Just wanted to let you know your story gave me the push I needed. It humbled me, deeply. But it also made me wary, because I did not want to become a symbol. Symbols get projected on. They stop being people. They become ideas. And once people start seeing you as an idea, they stop hearing your real voice. They hear what they need to hear in order to justify their own steps. I was not a hero, not a rebel, not a disruptor. I was a guy who got a text that ended his job in the middle of a tennis match. That is it. Everything that followed, the rebuilding, the clients, the growth, came from the same place anyone else's next step could come from. Not brilliance, just clarity, and a refusal to carry the weight of a place that had already let me go. A few months in, we reached a point where I knew we had to make a choice. Stay lean, or grow deliberately. We had more client interest than we could take, more project requests than bandwidth. The temptation was obvious. Scale, hire more, formalize, invest in systems, pitch investors, talk about vision. But I paused, because sometimes growth is not a win. Sometimes it is just a new version of losing control. So I called a meeting, just the 5 of us who made up the core of the operation. I laid it out honestly. We can stay as we are, high trust, project-based, low bureaucracy. Or we can start building the infrastructure to grow, but that comes with trade-offs, pace, people, pressure. They listened. No one rushed to answer. Then my ops lead, a former contract manager who had worked in more chaos than I could imagine, said something I will never forget. Growth is fine, but only if the point is still clarity. We agreed to stay lean, not forever, but for now, until we found a model that allowed us to scale without folding into the very system we had stepped away from. Around this time I got an email with a subject line that just read, "Interested in a conversation?" It was from someone high up at a legacy investment group, the kind that usually backs conventional tech growth plays, not scrappy, principle-first strategy collectives like ours. Responded, partly out of curiosity. The call was cordial, polished, practiced. She asked about our origin, our clients, our delivery style, our team design. Then she leaned in. "We have been following what you are building," she said. "There is appetite for an investment, something that could help formalize the model and give you a seat at bigger tables." I stayed quiet. She continued. "It is rare that something with this kind of clarity survives without outside backing. You are a signal in a noisy space. With funding, you could scale faster and be in the room with institutions making decisions you should be part of." It was tempting. I will not lie, but then I asked the question that mattered. "What do you expect in return?" There was a pause. Then, "Influence, not control." I thanked her for her time, told her I would think on it, and I did. I thought for 3 days. Then I declined. Not because I had anything against funding, but because the story of this company was not about winning faster. It was about proving there was another way, and rushing into the same system I had been thrown out of via a careless text message. It felt like erasing everything we had built so far. So I chose the slower road. Again. Months passed. The company grew in reputation, if not in size. Our clients were stable. Our delivery was clean. Our outcomes were sharp enough that we never had to market ourselves. And then one day, out of nowhere, I got a call from a blocked number. I usually ignore those. This time, I picked up. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was him, my former boss. Same clipped tone. Same self-assured cadence. But something was off. He got right to it. "I made a mistake," he said. I said nothing. I should not have done it that way. The text, the timing, all of it. Still, I stayed silent. He exhaled. "I have seen what you are doing. The people you have pulled with you. The way the work is spoken about. You are building something solid. I did not respond with anger or smugness. Just this. You made your choice. Now you are watching mine. There was a long pause. Then he asked almost casually, "Is there room for a conversation?" I almost laughed, but I did not. Instead, I said the clearest thing I could. "No. There is room for distance, and I plan to maintain it." He did not argue. He hung up without another word. That was the last time I heard from him. And it was the last time I needed to explain, to myself or anyone else, why I chose this path, because sometimes you do. Not rebuild to prove someone wrong. You rebuild to prove that you were always right to begin with. Not perfect. Not infallible. Just clear. And you do it not for revenge, but for the peace of knowing that the worst moment someone else dropped on you by text became the beginning of the best decision you ever made. We are still small, still lean, but when I look at the faces of the people I work beside, their posture, their conviction, their refusal to bend into what does not serve them, I know what we are building is not temporary, it is permanent. Not because of any legal filing or funding round or headline, but because the people inside it are real, and they are free. And that is something no former boss, no careless message, no broken system can ever erase. Not now, not ever.